And may I say good afternoon to each and every one of you who happen to be watching on YouTube. Welcome to the Township of Douro-Dummer and a very special council meeting here on the 3rd of August. And this meeting, which should not be too lengthy, is basically for one reason and one reason only, and that is to get a report from our auditors. So that's why we're here. Our normal meeting will start at 5 o'clock. So we welcome everyone with a reminder, it is being live streamed on YouTube and is also being recorded for those who would like to watch later. I'm going to call the roll now so everyone knows who is in attendance from council standpoint. First of all, Deputy Mayor Moher, Councillor Watt, Councillor Landsman, and Councillor Watson. Thank you very much. For the record, all members of council are present. And our staff, the smiling faces of our CAO, Alana Arthurs. Alana, hi. And Deputy Clerk Martina Chade-Hartwig is here. Martina, that's great. And our interim treasurer, Paul Kramer, is also here. Paul, welcome. So I will officially call the meeting to order. And as I mentioned, the only reason for this meeting is a presentation by Veronica Mason and Joanna Parks, the auditors from Baker Tilly. So gang, do we see you on our screen? There they are. How nice to see you both again. No strangers to Douro-Dummer, and we welcome you ladies, and we're going to turn it right over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And don't worry, we paid note, Mayor, to your comment about short meeting. We won't drag this on any longer than it has to be.
that was a hint. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. Today we are presenting the 2019 financial statements, and we do have a presentation. I wasn't sure, Clerk or Deputy Clerk, if you're going to share your screen or you want us to do that.
It should be on the screen now.
Yep, we're good.
Perfect. There it is. Okay, so we are here presenting the 2019 financial statements. And this, we provided in your packages, you have the financial statements for 2019, as well as what we call the post-audit letter. This presentation summarizes both of those. So it kind of gives you the summary of all of those. But of course, we're happy to address any specific questions from either of the other documents as well. And we'll start right in on the next slide then. What we've done is we've taken a snippet of your auditor's report, and this is basically the most important paragraph. This is what you want to see. It's a clean auditor's opinion, and it says, in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the township at December 31st, 2019. And it is in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards, which you as a municipality have to abide by. The rest of the auditor's report is, it's 2 pages long, and it is included in your package there, and we're happy to address any questions, but we really just want to highlight the main thing being it is a clean auditor's opinion. This slide goes through our audit procedures. We're required to tell council what we do as part of our audit. And so these are kind of a few things we do. We always put in a few surprises. We review minutes of council right up until the date of our presentation. So we've read them as close as we can up to today. We do substantive testing. So we do sampling of invoices, payroll, journal entries, that kind of thing. We look at analytical review, comparing balances to budget and prior years. We look at estimates to make sure that the way that management is estimating certain numbers within your financial statements, that it's reasonable. We also look at certain controls and systems, and look at the kind of the way that you process things like revenue, disbursements, payroll, and journal entries. And the audit is complete pending council's approval of the financial statements, which ideally will happen today. And then once that happens, we also need a representation letter from management just saying they've provided us everything we need to do the audit. And as part of the last audit documentation, we need the legal letters. There's just one actually that we send out to lawyers, just verifying whether there's any outstanding claims or not. Now we have here no significant difficulties encountered during the course of our audit procedures. It is August 3rd, I believe, and we're presenting the 2019 financial statement. So the difficulties there was just a change in staffing. So there was nothing that was a deliberate result of anything. That isn't the reason for delays. It was with staffing issues that caused us to delay from your end being able to complete the audit and get the information we required to complete it. So that was kind of the issues. But overall, we didn't have any disagreements or difficulties with any of the staff in place, and always excellent cooperation. And we've come to expect that. So we really thank everyone for their patience. Never mind it all being during COVID, and it is very difficult to complete an audit from both ends. Definitely our client's perspective there, to go through an audit during COVID can be very frustrating, that's for sure. One thing we do have note there is a subsequent event note to your financial statements, and that's with regards to COVID. And it talks about the implications of COVID not being known at this time. So that's really just a highlight to the readers. You won't find a set of financial statements that don't talk about that. There's nothing recorded in your financial statements with regards to COVID. It's just to let you know that there could be future implications to your finances because of it. There are a few uncorrected audit differences. When I looked at the total of them, when you kind of add the pluses and minuses up, they actually come out to an impact on your net income, or your surplus, if you will, of $18. So nothing significant, just kind of some pluses and minuses. And that's just balances that for one reason or another, they just needed to be tweaked. We didn't restate them. We didn't feel they needed to be. We still will issue our clean auditor's opinion as a result of those. And now I will turn it over to Veronica, who will talk about the numbers, and you'll see, I'll come back in a few minutes.
Thank you. So the slide that you see in front of you there, these are your financial assets as at December 31st. The column on the left is 2019, so the year that we are discussing, and as well the 5-year history is provided just to kind of give you an idea of the trend within the township over the past few years. You can see there that, as always, your most significant financial assets are your cash and your investments. So cash held in bank accounts mainly, and your investment accounts as well. And you can see there's a bit of an increase over the prior year, and that's due to some surplus amounts that you had put into reserves by the end of 2019. You do also have some taxes receivable as another significant item, and I know you watch your percentages from year to year, and both 2019 and 2018, your taxes receivable balance was about 6% of your total amounts levied, so that's well within the provincial benchmark of 10%. And at the end of 2019, your total financial assets for the year were about $8.5 million. The next slide shows the same amounts. This one you read left to right instead of right to left. You can see green is cash, blue is investments. You can see that those are, as I said, your most significant assets, and you can see the increase over the past 5 years in those assets. And then we have a similar slide for your financial liabilities as at December 31st. You always have some accounts payable, which fluctuates due to timing of payments and due dates. But that would be any expenses you had incurred up to the end of 2019 where the payment was not due or not made until into 2020. Your deferred revenue in obligatory reserve funds consists mainly of your gas tax funds. That's the balance of gas tax you have that's unspent at the end of 2019, and that was about $774,000. The remainder of that line is $16,000 in development charges. And then 2 other items just to note there are your landfill closure and post-closure liability and your employee future benefits. So those are liabilities that you record. And when we get to the accumulated surplus slide, you'll see that they don't really impact your operating surplus or deficit for the year. These are future liabilities that you're expected to raise the funds for when you need to settle the liability. So you do need to record that you have these obligations, but the year-over-year change in these obligations doesn't affect your operating surplus or deficit for the year. And at the end of 2019, your financial liabilities were about $2.3 million. And then the next slide is similarly just a graph showing the trend. Your accounts payable are in blue and your obligatory reserve funds are in red. So you can see the trend from year to year there, and they tend to vary depending on what projects you have on the go in any given year. The next slide is the first line on that slide, it's called non-financial assets, but it does give us the total net financial assets. So that was the financial assets from that slide, less the financial liabilities for net financial assets of $6.2 million. So that's a good positive number, and it's increasing over 2018, which is also a positive thing. Your non-financial assets are mainly your tangible capital assets. So those are, just as the name said, anything tangible that you have on hand that has a long life. So anything from buildings, vehicles, road infrastructure. And those are shown at net book value, which is historical cost less any accumulated amortization up to the end of December 2019. And that's about $26 million. And then you have a few other non-financial assets. So those are just types of assets that aren't expected to be converted into cash. So things you've already paid for and aren't expected to liquidate. Prepaid expenses and inventories of materials and supplies. So things like sand, salt, and gravel that you hold for future consumption. When you take your net financial assets plus your non-financial assets, that gives you your total accumulated surplus at the end of the year of about $33.1 million. And we'll see a better breakdown of that on a future slide. This slide has a lot of numbers on it. It's your consolidated statement of operations. The top section shows you your budget versus actual versus prior year revenues and expenses as stated in the financial statement. So this is on the basis that are required under the Canadian public sector accounting standards. So you can see when you look at the budget this way, you see a budgeted surplus of 1.5 million versus an actual of about 1.4. Now, of course, we know that you don't set your budget looking for a $1.5 million surplus. So we've provided a reconciliation below that shows you the items that are either included in one form of budgeting, either PSAB or for your tax rate, and not included in the other. So your purchase of tangible capital assets, amortization of tangible capital assets, transfers to and from reserve funds are items that need to be reconciled when you're reconciling down to your operating surplus. Also, just to note that your actual transfer to reserves and reserve funds, the $2 million there in the middle towards the bottom, that does include a final surplus transfer of about $389,000. So you did reach an operating surplus of $389,000, which was transferred into the reserve at the end of the year, bringing your operating surplus to zero. And then we have a slide that just shows how that $33 million accumulated surplus compares to your tangible capital assets. So as you see, the tangible capital assets are in blue at net book value. The accumulated surplus is in orange. So most of your accumulated surplus at $33 million is tied up in the tangible capital assets. You've already invested it in those assets. And then this slide shows you kind of the 5-year trend of the revenues in blue. It shows you the 5-year trend of expenses in orange, and then the annual surplus there in green. That is on the basis of PSAB requirements. So that would be as stated on the financial statements. And then we get into a little more detail of your revenue and expenses. You can see that your total revenues for the year were about 8.19 million, which was very close to the budgeted amount of 8.17 million. And as always, property taxation and provincial grants are your most significant sources of revenue. The next slide really illustrates that. You can see property taxation in green. the province of Ontario there in red, and then the third largest are your user charges. So 61% property taxation, 16% province of Ontario, and 11% user charges. And then similarly for your expenses, your total actual expenses, 6.79 million compared to budget of 6.66. So just a little over budget for the year. You see that mostly on the transportation line. There was, looks like there was some more non-capital work done than had been anticipated in the budget, as well as purchases of sand and salt. It's hard to remember back to what kind of winter 2019 might have had, but those purchases were up a little bit. And just one note there, I have a typing error on the last line. That says planning and health. It should say planning and development. So in case you were confused on why those are grouped together, they're not. That line is planning and development. And then the next slide, again, shows you kind of the relative sizes of those various functions. So I don't think it would come as any surprise to you that transportation at 33% is your largest. Protection and general government are also significant. And then we do have the same expenses. This slide just breaks them down by object, so the type of expense, but it's the same $6.7 million actual versus 6.6 budget. And then if we go to the next slide, then you can kind of see the that's the relative sizes of those. So again, it's probably not terribly surprising to you that salaries and benefits and materials are your two largest types of expenses. And then this is the point where I will turn the presentation back over to Joanna.
This is just to keep you awake so that you're not listening to the same person the whole time through. As Veronica mentioned, you have an accumulated surplus of 33.1 million. We saw that a lot of it is made up of your amount invested in capital assets, which we can see on the top line there. So 26.2 million is invested in capital assets already of your accumulated surplus. Then you do have amounts that land held for resale sits in your surplus of $83,000. And then those liabilities that Veronica mentioned, the land, employee future benefits and landfill closure and post-closure, which show as negative here because you don't need to fund those until you're paying for them. So they get funded later on. And then the library has a small deficit as well. And then you'll see the section below, the reserves and the reserve funds, $7.1 million in total, and nice increase from the prior year. And as Veronica mentioned, $389,000 was put into the future capital projects reserve from an operating surplus that you did have. And that's why you don't see an operating surplus on this slide. It's been transferred into reserves as per prior council motion. And then the following slide just shows the trend in your reserves. So you see a nice increased trend there. Future capital projects, nice increase there. Most common asked question to municipal auditors is, do we have enough in our reserves and reserve funds? So I'll answer it now before I give you the chance to ask it. And that really all just depends on your asset management plan. So you really need to look at that and see what your future expenses are to see if you have enough to fund them in the future as you require them. So it takes a little bit of work to do that, but then it will give you an idea. And that's where you can't even compare municipality to municipality. It really depends on what capital projects you have going on and what you've done recently. So, but nice balance is there for sure. And definitely the trend is a good one there to see the increasing. That is not a bad thing at all. The following slide shows your capital asset additions, just so you can see a breakdown of what capital was purchases. Most of it being almost 550,000 on roads and bridges. Just as a reminder, what happened in 2019, you did some work on White Lake Road, 12th line of Douro-Dummer, 5th line of Douro, and the 2nd line of Douro, were your main roads and bridges projects. You did have some building improvements for the library, as well as Fire Hall number 4. And then some fire machinery and equipment, a public works vehicle, and some computers and computer software as well. The following slide just looks at overall how much you're adding to your capital assets or your tangible capital assets versus the amortization. So it's important to look at these, not necessarily year by year, but an overall trend to make sure that you're replacing your assets at a higher rate than you're amortizing. The amortization is based on your historical cost of your assets. So of course, you're replacing them at a higher cost. So you want to make sure that you're at least replacing them at the same amount, ideally more than you're amortizing them, which it looks like you are. Obviously, it's going to depend on the year for sure. And then the next slide looks at your average useful life. It's hard to see on this slide, but the green is the amount of remaining useful life you have by asset class, and the red is how much is amortized. So you've got your roads and bridges are showing 57% remaining useful life, which makes sense. They have a little longer life than, say, computers and software that has a shorter life. So it's good to look at it as a whole, but obviously that's, again, your asset management plan will show you where your needs are in the future. And then the last slide looks at your net financial asset trend. So Veronica had pointed out that you have $6.2 million in net financial assets at the end of 2019, and you can see the nice trend there. Definitely a big jump from 2018 to 2019, and that's with your surplus position and your increase in your cash that was related there. So, and that is it for our presentation. We're happy to address any questions.
Well, thank you. Now that the presentation is over, I thought I'd call on Paul, our treasurer with all the knowledge financially, just to get his view on the audit and how things stand. Paul?
Thank you, Your Worship. And first of all, thank you, Veronica and Joanna, for the presentation today and for not only your patience throughout this process, but for helping me out, probably giving me a little bit more background and history on some of the transactions and going on here at the township than you're used to. Just being new in my role, it was a big help for me. I think just for me, I typically find council, the big one that you guys want to know is our overall what we deem to be our surplus, and they did highlight that it was 389,000, and that was put into the future capital project reserve. Just a few notes on that. I do think that I kind of had an idea of that number during the budget, and that was one of the reasons we did take some funds from that reserve during the 2021 budget process. So those funds will go in and replenish that reserve. However, just in general of the reserve balances, I do plan on doing a more comprehensive review of all our reserve balances, the sufficient amount in each one, identifying where we're planning and the goal and purpose of each reserve, and wrapping that all into an updated reserve policy. My goal is to do that as part of the 2022 budget. And just to wrap things up on my end, now that 2019 is out of the way, we are moving on to doing year end for 2020. So I think it will feel like for me that I will have been in an audit for almost a year straight, because my plan then is to obviously start this process much earlier for 2021 in 2022. So I'm reviewing timelines right now with Joanna and Veronica. We have some tentative dates scheduled for the preliminary 2020 audit, and we will follow that up with some dates for the final audit for 2020. In an ideal world, we would get something to you by end of calendar year for 2020, but again, that's ideal. We'll see how everything plays out on our end and also Baker Tilly's end. So again, thank you to Joanna and Veronica, and I think between the three of us, we can try to answer any questions that council has.
Thank you, Paul. We're certainly glad to have you being on top of things. I have a couple of questions, but I'll go to members of council who would like to ask anything. Carl, go ahead.
I have a comment and a couple questions. I'm happy to hear that the timeline for 2020, you're working on that and getting that cut. I'm sure, Paul, you'll be happy to get that out of the way as soon as possible. The first question has to do with the accounts payable. We were almost $1 million carried over in 19 to 20. Are there guidelines there? I asked this of the Joanna or Veronica. Are there guidelines there that we should be trying to focus to? Carrying over that much of the overall total appears to me to be a little bit on the high side. Should we be focusing more on getting those bills paid in November, December, or? And I have one other question.
Deputy Mayor, it really just depends. I was just scrolling through to see if I could see if anything jumped out as to what makes up the high balance. But a lot of times it really just depends on the type of expenses, like what's in that accounts payable. If you have construction projects on the go, sometimes it can be holdback. So no, there would be nothing that there'd be nothing you actually have to pay at that time. But we do set it up since it is an expense of the period. So it really just depends on what the expenditures is, but but we didn't, nothing came to our attention during our audit that made us think that you were behind on payments. It was just really sometimes just a timing difference.
Okay, and no guidelines as to how
No,
much?
no,
Okay.
there's no guidelines there.
The second question is user fees. 2019 was the year before COVID, and yet our user fees were off by almost $200,000. Was there anything in the review that you noticed that came to light to cause significant reduction in user fees?
The user fees were over budget by almost $200,000. It was a lot more activity than anticipated in the building department. So building permits were higher than budgeted.
Well, I read it the different way. I read it that it was less than previous years, but maybe I read it wrong.
Yeah, so the budget for user charges is $770,000 and the actual was $943,000.
Okay, well, I read it wrong then. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Anybody else? Any other questions? I have a couple. First of all, Veronica, under the revenues, you mentioned donations were on the pie chart, 2%. What's that consist of? I don't remember anyone donating money to our cause.
You did have a little bit. There's always a little bit of donations at the library. It's not terribly significant, but during the year, you had about $33,000 of fire hall donations as well in 2019.
Okay, of course, that makes sense. Yep. Okay, thank you for that. And Joanna, I'll ask you the same question I've asked you pretty much every year since you've been here, and that is, how do we fare against other municipalities that are similar to us? You don't need to name names. I guess it's a final report card mark that I'm after.
Nothing alerted us to say that you weren't faring just as well, if not better, than other municipalities. Definitely, if there was anything that come to your attention, we would have brought it to you. So,
can I assume we have an A-, perhaps?
I could live with that. Yes.
Good. Oh, I love it. That makes it very clear.
We can get Paul to aim for the A+ this year.
That's right.
Lucky guy. He's going to be working in audit world for like a good year. So like you can't get a better job than that.
Okay, that was a great presentation, and we hope everyone enjoyed it. It gave us a bit of a thumbnail picture of the financial status of the township of Douro-Dummer. I got to congratulate staff for keeping us on the straight and narrow. It's not an easy thing to do, and I think we're in the right direction. Alana, as our CAO, do you want to offer a closing comment before we go?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a thank you to Joanna and Veronica, of course, for making this process relatively smooth. Being relatively new myself, I honestly could not have seen this through without Paul. So thank you, Paul, very much for getting us here. I'm definitely looking forward to having our 2020 completed and getting back on track with our 2022 budget in the near future. So thank you again to all of you. And I'm sure we will see you again soon with our 2020 audit.
That's great. Well said. Well said. Okay, Martina, what is it you would like from us? Simply receive the report, or do you need anything more complicated than that?
Mr. Mayor, we need to receive the report that's been presented. And there's also a letter that needs signatures from 2 members of council. So we will need council to choose 2 members to sign that as well. And Joanna or Veronica, if you can let me know if I've missed anything, that would be great.
Okay. That would be the motion that Martina just articulated, that we do receive the report and that 2 members of council will sign the appropriate documents. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Landsman will move that, and a seconder from Councillor Watson. All in favor? That's great. That motion is passed. Martina, go ahead.
Just a clarification for Councillor Landsman. Which 2 councillors would you like to sign the letter?
That would be part of your motion, I think, Sheila. You're muted, Sheila?
Yes, thank you. What about the mayor and the deputy mayor?
That's the motion. Is that okay with the seconder? Okay. Again, call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is approved. Okay, thank you all very much. Joanna and Veronica, I just want you to know, winter, spring, fall, or summer, you're always welcome in Douro-Dummer. Could I have a motion, please, to adjourn? Carl and Tom, all in favor? That motion is approved. Thank you all very much. For those of you watching on YouTube, our regular council meeting will start at exactly 5 o'clock today. To our special guests, thank you very much. We'll see you again. Everyone, please stay safe.